Welcome everyone to Behind Our Gender Masks, empowering young women and men to express their full humanity. I am Sara Saltee. I'm the Director of Leadership and Learning Programs at the Center for Partnership Studies. And on behalf of the Center, I'm really honored to welcome all of you who we've seen in the chat introductions are doing such important work all over the country and all over the world. And also a big welcome to our wonderful panelists today, who you'll be meeting in just a moment. I want to thank you all for being with us for this exciting and important conversation about how we can help young people enact gender differently so that we can break the legacy of pain, fear, self-censorship, and silence that have defined both femininity and masculinity for far too long. Whether you watch popular media or are tuning into the news from Washington, D.C., it's clear that we're in a time of powerful renegotiations about the meaning of gender, power, and identity. In this era of Me Too, Black Lives Matter, Time's Up, and Never Again, today's young women and young men have an unprecedented opportunity, really, to step out from behind the gender masks that have limited the range of acceptable expression and really contribute the best of who they are as human beings to the healing and evolution of our society. But how do we seize this opportunity? How do we support young women in rejecting visions of womanhood that equate femininity with subservience, devaluation, and sexualization? And how do we call young men into a vision of manhood that incorporates caring, creativity, and mutual respect as key markers of masculinity? Our panelists today have some great ideas about all of this, and they're really here today to share practical strategies for shaping the future of masculinity and femininity in ways that support all of us in claiming powerful voices and authentic lives. Before we begin, I want to quickly thank our wonderful co-sponsors for this event. These are organizations who really helped us get the word out. And for any of you who are here representing any one of these wonderful organizations, thanks for being with us and thanks for helping us spread the word. Our co-sponsors include the Ever Forward Club, which you'll be hearing more about in just a moment, Love the Skin You're In, Linda Stahaley and the Global CoLab Network, Richard Kripe, MD of the Golisano Children's Hospital, Hannah Lynn at the YWCA in Muskoka, California, Jackie Latham and the Ontario School Counselors Conference, Jessica Haney and Mindful Healthy Life, Brian Cisco and the Representation Project, and Jeannie Rosner and the Soul Food Station. Please check out those organizations if any are new to you, and give them your support and thank them for supporting us at the Center for Partnership Studies and the work of renegotiating gender. So we're going to begin today by allowing each of our wonderful panelists to share a little bit about their projects and perspectives, and then we'll be moving into a time of conversation with you. So we're going to invite your questions and comments throughout the panelists' initial comments today. If something occurs to you that you want to ask, jot it down in the chat box, and we'll take as many questions and comments as we have time for today in that second part of our session.
Sara, can I interrupt a moment? Are you recording?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And also somebody said there was an echo, so perhaps we can remind people to mute themselves.
Well, everyone is on mute other than our panelists.
Good.
So I hope that thank you for calling attention to that, though, and please, those of you listening, let us know if that persists, and we'll see what we can do. It might be helpful for our panelists, when you're not actively speaking, to have yourselves on mute. That may cut down some of that. Thanks for letting us know there's no echo for those of you who aren't hearing it. It's fine now. Oh, good. And sometimes if, for those of you joining us internationally, there can be a little bit more distortion just because of the distance and the differences in internet connection. So please just exercise your patience, and hopefully most things tend to resolve themselves, but do let us know in the chat if there's other issues that come up along the way. Thank you. One other technical note, after the session today, you'll be receiving a follow-up email, which will include both a link to this recording so you can share it with your colleagues and friends, as well as a number of other resources for you. So if you're wondering if you'll have access to this after the fact, the answer is yes. So we thought we'd just open today with this wonderful quote from James Baldwin. Love takes off masks that we fear we cannot live without and know we cannot live within. Our panelists are each doing the work of helping young people take off the masks we can no longer live within. And they are doing it with great love, as I think you're going to hear and appreciate in their presentations today. The first panelist I want to introduce to you is Brie Mathers. Brie is the founder of Love the Skin You're In, a resiliency project for young women and young men. She conducts connective school-wide events about media literacy, mindfulness, and partnership. She's spoken to 100,000 teen girls worldwide, inspiring them to find compassion within themselves and for one another, and to lead a new conversation about bodies and beings. And she works with a core team of teen social media activists to make it all happen. Brie speaks regularly at the Franchise for Humanity conference at Stanford University's Global Innovation Summit, and she's collaborated with National Youth Week New Zealand, Bay Area TEDx, University of Rochester Medical Center, YWCA, and Center for Partnership Studies here. Her work has been featured in the Toronto Star, the San Jose Mercury News, and Coastal Living magazine, and she's the author of Freedom to Blossom. Welcome, Brie.
Thank you, Sarah.
Tell us more, and let us know as you'd like to have the slides move.
Okay. So I'm just so excited to be here today and share this work with everyone. So I'm the creative director of Love the Skin You're In, which is a leadership and resiliency project that fosters critical thinking about the impact of popular media representations on self-confidence. So in a hard-hitting, heart-to-heart conversation, we examine the effect that this imagery has on, in particular, young women's ability to be compassionate, both with themselves, with one another, online, and also their readiness to be active and engaged citizens in the world. So it is, you know, these rooms I walk into are big rooms. There's usually 400 to 600 young women in them. I present most often at the middle school, high school, and college levels. And we just start to have a conversation. And of course, we live in this 100% media-saturated, porn-saturated, you know, image-centered, commercialized culture. And inside of this, the socialization of adolescent girls is pretty much totally dehumanizing. It's highly racialized, it's highly genderized. They're waking up every morning to face the tyranny of hotness and a world that is teaching them at every step to think less and buy more. Due to the fast fashion industry, we have 400% more consumption than 2 decades ago. So now they're in positions of often buying something, wearing it on social media a couple of times, sometimes dumping it, sometimes returning it. And my role inside of all of this is to persuade them to find their voices and speaking truth to power. And that means having a conversation with them that is very heart-centered. That when the desire, basically only to be desired, becomes our #1 priority, it becomes easy to lose ourselves inside of that. And of course, where once sexualized images of women in media presented us as sort of these passive, mute objects of this assumed male gaze, today we're presented as active, desiring sexual subjects who choose to present ourselves in an objectified manner because it suits our liberated feminist interests to do so. So not only are we being objectified as we have always been, but through this sexual objectification, we must now understand that our posed, enhanced, bound, sexualized bodies are pleasurable and self-chosen. And nowhere do we see a better example of this than when summer hits and the Instagram feeds flood with bikini selfies. So my job is to go in there and persuade them that objectification is the opposite of empathy. It erodes confidence, it reduces self-awareness, and it compromises our sense of security right where we live, which is inside of these bodies. I'm sure many of you have heard the slogan that people were created to be loved and things were created to be used. And the reason why the world is in chaos is because things are being loved and people are being used. So I take these young women on a journey that does not deny them their ability to question, interpret, and resist the problematic messages in news and pop culture. We have a big conversation about resiliency, which I learned a lot about during a 2-year stint at a Zen mindfulness temple in the Santa Cruz Mountains of Northern California. You know, the brain is plastic and the heart is a muscle. And those two pieces of information are very good news, because that means that no matter what the cultural forces are that we are facing, there is a way through them. One of the things I like to do is present them with the research, right? So things like self-objectification actually lead to decreased condom use, decreased sexual assertion, increased disordered eating, increased depression. And then I also help them ask themselves questions around sex etiquette, for example. Is it body positive to post a sexy selfie of yourself? Is it body confident? Is it still body confident if you Photoshop said image of yourself? And then what impact does posting a picture of yourself have on the girls around you who may be comparing themselves to that image? I can say that having been in the field for many years, I have seen some disturbing trends. The vulva is now open to public scrutiny. You know, mainstream porn sites get more hits monthly than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. So inside of this pornified culture, I have spoken with school counselors who talk about girls who are giving blowjobs to the boys just so that they can stand next to them in the school hallways. And another disturbing trend that I've seen is that you know, in my co-ed talk, sometimes there will be a cluster of girls that will approach me afterwards and say, we're sorry we didn't participate, but when we express anything that's remotely feminist, the boys call us feminazis. So, you know, this all informs us. There is lots of work to be done, but there is an antidote, you know, the recognition that humanity takes a back seat the second the human body becomes a thing and not a person. We can appeal to loving kindness. You can't Photoshop kindness. And love is actually a verb. So one of the things I like to do is bond young women together in the way that they are being subjugated by this messaging so that they can see that there is a universality in their experience together. And let that open them forward. And because the populations I'm speaking to, they're not far removed from when they were just kids, right? And we're talking about kids that are, you know, 10 years past 5 years old or 15 years past 5 years old. So I bring them back. I do visualizations with them wherein they are imagining that place of total primordial innocence that they had when they were 5, when their minds were open and free before they got hit with this onslaught of cultural conditioning. And that's when the tears start to roll. And inside that space of vulnerability, connection happens and belonging happens. And we recognize that perfect is boring, and that more than that, it is stagnant. And that, you know, if there was such a thing as perfect, it would be sad. It doesn't move or flow or create, and that their voices are needed for the future of humanity. And that's where I bring in Riane's work and talk about, you know, her work with those 89 different nations around the world, wherein they really discovered that, you know, when women are at the table, that is when policies change. That is when these policies get enacted that actually support the well-being of women and men and the planet and children. So I like to walk out of those rooms having these young women recognize that the power can shift, you know, if we move into a more partnership-based system. The only thing that can reflect who you really are is the eyes of the people who love you. Your body is strong, it is graceful, it is powerful, and it has value just because it houses you. Full stop. I could keep going, but.
So Brie, let's take a look at some of the other images that you've shared from your work, and if you want me to pause and tell a story about any of these particular moments, please do. Otherwise, we'll just take a look here.
Oh yeah, this is Santa Catalina School in Monterey, California. This was actually my old high school. This is Bracebridge and Muskoka Lake Secondary School. One of the things I like to do is get the students up on stage emulating the poses, and get them laughing. And anyone who's working with young people, I'm sure you already know, but the best way to break the ice is with humor. So you can see them having a good time on stage, emulating the crazy contortions that models are put into in their posing. This was a Pace Academy in Atlanta. The girls here are doing sexy monkey pose. So one of my, moments of levity and icebreaker, because we go into these very deep, very heavy conversations. And so it's also very important to balance that out. So I try and have emotion to it. So in the middle of something that's heavy, I throw up this slide that's got a monkey basically doing sexy monkey pose, and I have all the girls stand up and throw a sexy monkey pose. So we make sure that we keep our sense of humor throughout. This is 12 Corners Middle School in Rochester, New York. And one of our partners here today is Dr. Richard Kripke, and one of his partners is Dr. Mary Tantillo, and she did an enormous amount of work to bring me to Rochester for a National Eating Disorders Awareness Week tour. And this was live, one of the audiences in response to one of the slides. This is either Barker Road or Calkins Road. This is actually on that same tour, but it sort of gives you a feeling of the participatory nature of the talk. You can see the young women are very engaged, and almost half the hands are up in the room. It just, this talk just cuts right to the heart of their burgeoning sexual identities. So they're really with me. Yeah, and then the real gold comes at the end of the talk when I ask them to reflect on what they learn. And part of that is that it creates a powerful learning opportunity for them to self-reflect on what they've seen and integrate it within themselves. But also, it's an opportunity for me to keep going as an activist. So as you might imagine, when you get testimonials like this, it just cracks you right open. And the one on the right was very exciting. That was actually from H.B. Woodlawn School. I think it was the week after Donald Trump's election. And she was feeling fierce, and she was ready to take on a leadership role in the future. And I really hope she does. Oh yeah, so this one was from Cape Cod. I spoke at a middle school in Cape Cod. The one on the left. The one on the right is from Timmins, Northern Ontario. Yeah, so the one, if everyone wants to take a minute and just read that one on the right. I often get testimonials wherein girls talk about being in the bathtub and holding their breath underwater and feeling like they don't want to be here, and just that inner dialogue of self-hatred that, of course, has been completely conditioned and promulgated by our culture. And one of the things that I hope to do in this talk is not just lift the smoke and mirrors on prevalent representations of women in the media, but it's free them from that inner tyrant, or that inner mean girl that can come in and kind of set up camp inside your head and decide that she's there to stay. So that's what building resiliency is all about. It's about recognizing that voice for what it is. And this was from St. Margaret's School on Vancouver Island. I'm just about to head back up to Vancouver Island to present at Queen Margaret's and Brentwood College and Shawnigan Lake School and others. And this was a moment after the talk. This was a young woman from China, and she was in tears, just grappling with some of the issues that obviously come up when you have a conversation like this with young women.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Brie, for sharing a little bit about your work, and these images tell so much about the impact that you're having. And so those of you watching, think that if you have questions you'd like to that relate to Brie's work, please share them in the chat, and we'll come back and pick those up as we go after we've heard from our other panelists and as we move into our Q&A time, our conversation time. So thank you, Brie. And now I want to welcome and bring into the conversation Ashanti Branch. I've made you French today. Ashanti is the founder and executive director of the Ever Forward Club, which is an organization dedicated to mentoring young men of color in middle and high school by providing them with safe, brave communities that build character and transform lives. In 2004, when he was a first-year teacher, Ashanti started the Ever Forward Club to provide a support group for African American and Latino males who were not achieving to the level of their potential. Since then, the Ever Forward Club has grown to serve both young men and women and become a 501c3 nonprofit organization. The Ever Forward Club has helped 100% of its members graduate high school, and 93% of them have gone on to attend college. So with over 19 years mentoring youth and 10 of those years as a math teacher, educating inner city youth, Ashanti was awarded a Fulbright Exchange Fellowship to India, a Rotary Club Cultural Ambassadorial Fellowship to Mexico, and a 2010 Teacher of the Year Award from the Alameda Contra Costa County Math Educators. So we're delighted to introduce to you Ashanti. Take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We're here in the East Coast. Really glad to be here with all of you. I had an opportunity this morning. I was presenting to educators here in Charlottesville, Virginia, who are really trying to redefine how we set up schools for young people. Our work primarily is how do we support our young men around their social emotional development, but all around the world we get an opportunity to provide space for young people to come alive. And with educators, it's important that we know how to provide spaces for our young people to do that. So I'll tell a brief how Ever Forward started, and then I'll just kind of talk about what the big work that we're doing today. So I grew up in Oakland, California, raised by a single mother, and just a journey of trying to figure out by myself what it meant to be a real man, while there was different rules inside my house as opposed to outside my house. I had the rules that my mom required for me to show up as, which included a lot of caring, and I was like the man of the house, but I was in charge of my siblings. So I was like running a home, a lot of caring and love and empathy. If you're raising kids, you know that you got to learn a lot of those tools and empathy and space and patience. But when I walked out of the house, there was a different set of rules in Oakland, California about what it meant to be a brown, black boy going around the city. And I learned there was two different rules. Like if I was outside of my house acting very nice and kind and gentle and responsible and respectful, those kind of behaviors actually seem to cause problems. It would seem counterintuitive that you could be too nice for people. But in Oakland, where I grew up, if you're too nice, people are like, what's wrong with you? Like, what's the problem with you? If you're too calm and gentle, people can take advantage of you. And so I had to learn to live in kind of two different worlds. And I had to clearly have a couple of masks that could let me live in a very rough community, but also feel safe and feel like I could get home safely, get to school safely, take care of my brothers and sisters. And so after I go to college and then graduate in engineering, and then I figure out that I'm supposed to be a teacher. Like something inside of me said you should be a teacher, but I'm an engineer and I make good money. why would I leave that to go to a job where, first of all, doesn't pay well, and here where I live, and didn't seem to get a lot of respect. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that. But when I finally answered the call of my life that I was supposed to be a teacher, that first year teaching, I realized that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is the work that I'm supposed to be doing in my life. And that first year was how this work all started. There were some young men in my class who were really smart, and they were failing my class. Like they were showing up every day, and they were on time almost every day, but they were doing no work. And I was confused. I was like, I didn't come here to take this kind of low pay and then be a failure too, And I invited some young men to lunch, and I said, look, I'll buy you lunch once a week. In exchange for lunch, teach me how to be a better teacher. Like, tell me what I'm doing wrong. Like, help me fix it. Because I think that you're smart, and I think I'm a little smart. So, two smart people shouldn't be creating failure. So let me figure out what I'm doing wrong so I can help get better at it so then you can pass my class. And I think what I learned from them during those lunch meetings was that, man, it's not cool to be smart. I'm not going to be no nerd, no geek, no teacher's pet. Like, everything to them about being smart seemed to be negative. And I was like, well, in my mind, that's the only way you're going to graduate. But I also knew that as a 13-year-old, you already think you know everything. So there's only so much I'm going to be able to tell you to convince you to save your coolness until you're 25, Wait till you get out of college. But I knew that even when I got out of college, even though I was making really good money, I still didn't feel like I had enough. It still wasn't enough. And so how did I help? I think what happened with the Ever Forward Club is giving those young men a space to talk about what they were really going through and it'd be okay. I never had a place where I could talk about what I was really feeling and know it was okay. I always had to channel what I could talk about in certain places because there were certain things you just can't talk about as a young man. And so I provide that space for those young men. And what we created was this brotherhood, was a space at their school every Thursday at lunch in Portable 8. They would come and we would talk, and they would figure out what they needed and what they wanted help on. They would talk about everything that was going on with them. And then the question was, well, what do you want help on? Because my job is not to fix all of the stuff that you think is not going well. My job is to help you name it, and then decide what things you want to work on. Because I think that's what I think our young men didn't believe. That they felt like if you were asking for help, that meant you were weak, you were less than a man. And so our work around Ever Forward was building a space for them to be more human, to know that to feel is human. It is not a gender connected to feeling, but we've taught feeling out of a lot of our boys. Definitely where I grew up in California, in the Bay Area. And we know that nationwide that we have this hyper masculine narrative of what it means to be a man. And it oftentimes does not include kindness and caring and loving. And the narrative doesn't include usually those character traits. And so what we began doing Ever Forward is create that. And so
Ashanti, I'm going to interrupt you just briefly to ask you, I think there's something when you're using your hands and talking that's creating a clicking noise for people. Maybe, maybe the microphone is just bouncing off your
my car.
But so everyone is hanging on every word and wanting to be sure we hear you cleanly without the clicking. So let's just see if that works. It helps.
Thank you. Well, I'm getting excited. So if it happens again, let me know. I'll do my best to not move so much. And so anyway, the Ever Forward Club started 2004. In 2015, we were featured in a documentary called The Mask You Live In, which is about American masculinity. That was done by the Representation Project, one of the sponsors of the event today. And that documentary it takes a journey with men and boys to learn what are the challenges that they face in this hyper masculine narrative, and how the society that is failing our boys, how do we provide a space for our boys and men to feel more whole, to feel more alive. And so through the work we did in the documentary, we launched a campaign called the 100,000 Mask Challenge. And the work that we get to do around the country is giving people a space to talk about what it is that they let the world see about themselves, and then what are the things that we don't let people see. The front of the mask, the things that we gladly let people see, and behind the mask, the things that we don't usually let people see. And so in the tool, because it's anonymous, it gives some people some freedom to say, you know what, here are the things I show the world, and here are the things I don't. And we've done this all over. So in a lot of the pictures you see, we take our young men on these journeys. They get to, this is in New Zealand. We've been in 10 countries, people making masks. We've collected so far 25,000 masks. We have, so this is one here. This is an example of a mask. And we've offered this tool to educators for free. We give it away. And I ask for educators or people who do it with their family to say, I want to explore what this mask is. So this is a 10-year-old somewhere in Hayward. This is in California. And what he wrote on the front, these are the things that he shows the world. And then the back, these are things that he doesn't let people see. He doesn't let people see these parts of himself. And I think there's another one here you'll get to see. So this one is, you gotta let your eyes adjust to what's happening. It's but it's an adult, older male. This is a 48-year-old male. And you see the front, warrior, protector, confident, and then the back. And so what we've seen, and I'm going to read all of them, but I think what I want you to understand about this work is that when we have given people space to be human, to speak their truth, that we're clear that there's more about us in common than we think, but we oftentimes are focusing on see with our eyes. And we see with our eyes oftentimes is these masks. And until we get to a space where we're willing to let people be more than what we let them show before, then it makes it harder. And so I think I'm just really excited where the campaign is going. So like I said, we set the goal for 100,000. We're at 25,000 right now. And what we're seeing in some of the things around the world, whether we're in the Bay Area, whether we're in New Zealand, whether we're in Mexico, whether we're in Canada, is that there's some commonality about the things we don't talk about. And, I think our men in the United States, 94% of people in jail are men in prison. 94% are men. So either that means that men are just bad, or that we've taught men things when they were boys, that when they become adults, they don't get to live among the free. And we have to cage them to protect the world from them. And I think that if we don't let boys feel all their feelings and emotions and they're really good and know that it's okay, then we're going to keep repressing it. We're going to keep repressing it. And what happens is you see 10-year-old boys at 10 years old, you should be able to feel what you want to feel. But you feel that this boy right here, if you look at this card, he shows people that he's bad, that he's mean, that he takes no funny business. But he doesn't get to show that he's nice and that he's caring. Like, that's real. That's his truth written on a card anonymously. And we can either pretend like it was just a picture on a piece of paper, or we can say, you know what, we have something to do. And I think that my work has been about, I don't have time to talk about it. I wanted to do something about it. And that's why Ever Forward Club started. I was a teacher saying, I can't just keep watching this happen. I'm not willing to wait 3 years to become a better teacher. I'm going to do it now. And that's how this all has come about. And so we're really excited. And so I'm excited for this conversation. I'm glad that we are in this partnership to really discuss this. I think the more that we can give all humans, all adults, space to talk about things and be supported around them, I think we can open up some really deep conversations and some deep community all around the world.
Thank you, Ashanti.
Thank you.
And I think that middle word on that says depressed, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's what I think he means.
I think that's how I read it.
Yeah, that's
and
how I read it.
I think that at 10 years old, that sense of isolation, depression, loneliness, anger, all of those things that show up on these amazing cards that you have shared, are so powerful. It's that silencing, of that reality that gets us into so much trouble, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's the silencing, and because we believe that society won't accept us. Yeah. And that's what the young men we work with, they're clear that these are things I can show and people are okay with, but I can't show these other things. And it's been really amazing. And we're excited. The goal of 100,000 is about just a set a goal for us, but we've seen already in one workshop with 20 young men, these kind of words, that tells us that we need to do something. And I think these conversations are the beginning of doing something about it, you know?
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
I look forward to the conversation as well. And now let's bring into the conversation Riane Eisler. Riane is the president and founder of the Center for Partnership Studies, and she is familiar to many of you as an internationally known systems scientist, attorney working for the human rights of women and children, and the author of groundbreaking, and we hear very often, life-changing books such as The Chalice and the Blade, Our History, Our Future, which is now in 26 foreign editions, and The Real Wealth of Nations, Creating a Caring Economics. Dr. Eisler has received many honors, including honorary PhDs and Peace and Human Rights Awards. She lectures worldwide, including the United Nations General Assembly, the US Department of State, congressional briefings, universities, corporations, conference keynotes, and events hosted by heads of state. Dr. Eisler is also co-founder of the Caring Economy Campaign, the Spiritual Alliance to Stop Intimate Violence, SAVE, and is editor-in-chief of the Interdisciplinary Journal of Partnership Studies, which is an online peer-reviewed academic journal housed at the University of Minnesota that was inspired by Eisler's work. So welcome, Riane, and we look forward to your contributions to this important conversation.
Thank you so much, Sara, and thank you so much, Brie and Ashanti. You know, the work that you're doing is vital, not only for the young people fortunate enough to be with you in person, but for society. Because, well, and that's really what I'm going to be talking about, because my work has been about something that has been implicit in both your talks, Brie and Ashanti, which are these social pressures on young people that are unrelenting and that are unhealthy and that make them miserable, but at the same time, in a vicious kind of a reinforcing cycle, keep an unhealthy society, an unhealthy economy going. And I really want to start with something that I think is very important for us to recognize, which is that how we socialize children, boys and girls, is not just a, quote, gender issue. It is a core human and social issue because, and can we have the next slide? I think you know you can just do it, Sara. Because really what we're teaching young people is what it means to be human as a girl and as a boy, as a woman and as a man. So therefore, the contemporary questioning of these stereotypical gender roles that Ashanti and Brie are helping young people to do is nothing less than questioning what it means to be human. And as we disentangle, and this is really essential to understand, as we disentangle masculinity from this association, you know, that Ashanti spoke about so eloquently, from violence, from domination, entitlement, toughness, right? And permit men, boys, to embrace their full humanity. In other words, also their so-called soft and caring part, we are building a safer, more caring world, safer and more caring families, and a safer and more caring societies. And at the same time, as we permit young women to embrace their full humanity and get away from this hypersexualized, subservient identity that is fostered both directly in some communities, but certainly indirectly by so much of the so-called popular culture, not just porn, but really advertising, everything, which is unhealthy not only for them, but it really is unhealthy for them as purveyors to their children of what it means to be a woman, to both boys and girls. I mean, it's a mess, okay? And this is why the work that both Ashanti and Brie are doing is so important. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is what I really would like you to pay attention to. My research has demonstrated something that most sociological analyses don't, because they don't take into account the cultural construction of gender roles and relations, and also early childhood experiences and observations. But let's stay with gender. Historically, social and fiscal priorities have followed what I call a hidden system of gendered values that we've inherited. So where women are devalued, so-called masculine priority become fiscal priorities. So what do? You get higher investments in weapons, in wars, in prisons, because of this association of real masculinity with toughness, with domination, with violence, with the punitive father. Yeah, the prison. I mean, it is really a gendered system of values. By contrast, where women are highly valued, and we did, as Brie mentioned, a study way back in 1995, studying 80 statistical data from 89 nations, where women have a higher status, so-called feminine priorities, caring, caregiving, nonviolence, become fiscal priorities. So yes, you have a higher investment in caring for humans and nature. And I think we've got to really recognize this. We've got to unpack this hidden system of gendered values so that we can see that this work of redefining, quote, masculinity and femininity is actually basic, fundamental to building a better society. And I think that this is something that I hope you can all bring to social activists who are so siloed so often. They want to work on a better environment, or they want to work on social justice, but they consider, anything connected with gender, just a women's issue, which of course they devalue, because that's the system of values we've inherited, right? Next slide, please. We've also been told distorted stories about difference, right? Which of course, starting with the difference between the two forms, right, of our species, female and male. And I think this really shows it very overtly. Now it's a little bit less overt in some cases, but it's still there. Please, next slide. But what happens, and this is something, again, that my research shows, and that common sense really would show if we hadn't been taught to think of gender as just, this, unimportant, right, secondary women's issue. What happens when children grow up in families, in cultures, in subcultures, where difference, beginning with this fundamental difference in form between male and female in our species, is equated with superiority or inferiority, dominating, being dominated, being served, or serving. Children, before their critical faculties are formed, before their brains are fully developed, internalize this template, don't they, for equating all differences with, superiority or inferiority, dominating or being dominated, being served or serving, whether it's based on race, religion. You know, in this country, it's based on race. In the Middle East, it's based on religion, you know, Shia versus Sunni, Sunni versus Shia. It doesn't matter. Wherever you have this kind of subservience of women, which is a core component of an unjust and imbalanced society, you are going to get this. Next slide. Now, the Center for Partnership Studies is providing a new frame. And it's a frame that we really need to build a more just and sustainable society. Next, please. Because look, if you really think of our old social category, Eastern versus Western, left versus right, religious versus secular, ancient versus modern, industrial versus pre or post-industrial, not only do these categories just focus on a particular aspect of society, but think about it. They pay scant, if any, attention to the cultural construction of our foundational primary human relations, the relations between the female and male halves of humanity, and between them and their daughters and sons. And, you know, this is why, as I said, this questioning of gender stereotypes, as well as the questioning of, quote, traditional child rearing, which was very fear-based, very punitive, right, is so fundamental. Next slide, please. So change the frame. For a moment, and perhaps forever, if you can, leave behind these old categories. You know, a colleague of mine calls them weapons of mass distraction because they fragment our consciousness and they reinforce this devaluation of gender and children's issues. What we've introduced, that comes out of my research, is a different frame. A frame that does include the interconnections between the so-called personal and the so-called public, between what happens in gender and childhood and what happens in politics, in economics, in religion, in everything. And one is the domination system. And we're all really familiar with it if we think about it, because that's what we're trying to leave behind. And it's based on rigid rankings and hierarchies of domination in both the family and state. Notice both family and state. Yes, very rigid gender stereotypes, because how else can you rank one kind of person, you know, whether it's a racial stereotype or a gender stereotype, you have to have these rigid stereotypes that rank men over women, and so-called masculinity, which Ashanti and Brie have talked about so eloquently, over so-called femininity. And there is in this system a great deal of built-in and even idealized abuse and violence. You know, just wait till your father gets home, right? From child and wife beating to warfare, because that's what ultimately is needed to impose and maintain rankings. Now, if you go to the other side of the partnership domination social scale, and by the way, no society is a pure partnership or domination society, but societies that orient closely to the domination side, whether they're Hitler's Germany or Stalin's Soviet Union or Kim Jong-un's North Korea, or whether they're, you know, secular Eastern and Western societies, or whether they're religious societies like ISIS or the Taliban, or those in the West who are trying to push us back, they always make a top priority, don't they, of reinstating the so-called traditional family, which is a code, isn't it, for a rigidly male-dominated, highly punitive family. This is not coincidental, okay? So let's move to the partnership side of the social scale. And we see these kinds of societies in tribal societies, in prehistoric societies, and we also see a strong movement towards them, particularly in Nordic societies, But look, you have linking mutual respect and hierarchies of actualization in both the family and the state or tribe. That's the goal. These are very specific goals for us to build foundations. Gender partnership, and with this, a valuing of caring, caregiving, and nonviolence in women, men, and social and economic policies. And the third thing, of course, is, and I've got a chat here I've got to get rid of so I can read this, nurturing and sustaining life is highly valued. Why? Violence and abuse are not needed to maintain hierarchies of domination, including this so-called conquest of nature, right? That we have also inherited from more domination-oriented times. It's all of one piece, isn't it? All right, next slide, please. So we have our CPS leadership and learning programs, and I want to really invite all of you. We will be starting some more courses. We're of course now doing webinars in the near future to prepare people to implement the spread of these ideas, the spread of this new frame, so that we can much more effectively shift to partnership in ethos and action in all areas of life. And I really want to say here that this is why we so highly value the work that Ashanti and Brie are doing, because of the four cornerstones of childhood, of gender, of economics, because I speak of a caring economics, which is an anathema, isn't it? I mean, putting caring and economics in the same sentence, how dare you? You know, but that's what we need, is a caring economics where caring for people and for nature are recognized as top priorities. And of course, language. Language keeps us trapped in old thinking and new narratives, new stories. And that's very exciting, isn't it, about what's happening in our time, because we are really creating a new story. And it's a new story of nothing less than what it means to be human, and what kind of society can support rather than inhibit the expression of our enormous human capacities of women and men for consciousness, for caring, and for creativity. Thank you.
And thank you. So let's lose our slides and come together in this bigger picture format so we can really see everyone more fully. And this is a time for those of you who have questions about Ashanti's work, Brie's work, about the bigger frame that Riane has invited us into. If you're connecting some dots that maybe you hadn't connected before, we love to hear about that. And we'll watch the chat box as those come in. I wanted to start with a question that came a little bit earlier from Deirdre, who says, what a wonderful talk, and thank you all for your work. She has a question for the panel. She works as an LGBTQ affirming mental health counselor and has noticed in recent years that more and more children, teenagers, and adults are experiencing gender dysphoria. While I believe, she says, this is partially a result of people feeling more comfortable expressing their authentic identity, she's also curious about thoughts on the sociological and cultural factors that might also play a role. Could an increase in awareness of the limitations of gender roles be contributing to an increase in individuals, especially young people, who identify as non-binary or even transgender? And I wonder, you know, Brie or Ashanti, is this something that you're seeing or have a feel for in terms of the audiences that you're working with? Or Riane, you have thoughts on this, I know. Whoever would like to chime in, just please do.
Well, I can say in general, I mean, kids are feeling so much freer to be able to express wherever they express along the spectrum. And they are also experiencing more mutual support from friends in that. And in terms of media, we're also seeing more representations of trans and non-binary folk, people who are speaking out. One example is Monroe Bergdorf, who's a trans African-American model, who was actually fired from L'Oreal's campaign. It was apparently a campaign that was supposed to be championing diversity, but when Charlottesville happened, she spoke out about racism, the very thing that she was purportedly being, you know, hired to be a face for, and she was immediately dumped by L'Oreal from that campaign. But we are seeing increasing visibility. We see it in Orange is the New Black. We just, we got our first trans superhero. I got to look back to my Facebook page to see where that is, but that's huge.
Well, if I may chime in for a moment, I think that the issue is whether the questioning of gender roles and relations is contributing also to the greater, if you will, quote, permission for people who do not identify as either male or female, as, you know, sort of have a different identity to come out. And I think yes, because as long as you have these rigid stereotypes, you're stuck. You know, you have to be one or the other. And I want to, however, direct myself to Maritza Herrera's question, her point. The reason that the Nordic nations are more partnership oriented is not that they're more homogeneous. There are many homogeneous societies, Saudi Arabia, that are much more domination oriented, Iran. I mean, it is not a question of homogeneity. It is really a question of to what extent do they orient to the configuration that I've briefly presented of either the domination system or the partnership system. And one of the interesting things about, for example, Nordic nations, they contribute a higher percentage of their GDP than other wealthy nations to helping people that they've never met, people who are completely different, to, you know, NGOs working for people in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. But it's so easy to say, well, it's sameness that does it. Whereas, as I said, there are many societies that are quite homogeneous that orient to the domination side. It is the configuration. And I hope that as you immerse yourselves more in understanding how these dots all reinforce each other, and including the gender and childhood dots, you'll begin to look at this differently.
Ashanti, I'm wondering if what you see from your perspective in terms of working with young men of color and the specific histories around issues of sexual orientation differences that within communities of color that or non-binary gender thinking. How is that playing out in the boys that you work with, or what are you seeing?
Yeah, you know, I think Deidre's question is very, very profound. And I think what we're seeing in a lot of our work, so our work and our clubs, mostly here in Oakland, have mostly young men of color, but a lot of our workshops around the world are boys in general. And what we know, well, not what we know, what we're asking is, where can you be more of yourself? And I think that, you know, when I grew up, there was very strict, there were a lot of homophobic rules in my community. And so boys couldn't be really close friends with each other, or else you'd be called gay, or you'd be called a name, or you'd be like, well, or if you did have a friend who may have been gay or more feminine, like you had to question, like, can I hang out with this person or not? And it began to, like, I think it began to isolate people. It was like, say, well, I don't want people to think about me badly, so I'm going to not hang out with people. And I think it's very tough. And I think our boys that we work with, we do a lot of work around breaking down that, you know, that no homo thing, right? Like they will say something, a comment on somebody's shorts or shoes, like, oh, those are some nice shoes. And then they have to climb it, they have to cover it up with no homo at the end to prove to everybody around you that I'm liking your shoes, but I'm not gay. And I think, and I always have to do work around that, you know, and this work that you have to consciously do. As a teacher, we hear that a lot in classes. I could easily, as a teacher, just be like, I heard it, but I'm teaching math, so I'm not going to address it. I'm going to leave it alone. But I always stopped class and did work around it because I think it requires us to not let it play as a non-being heard. And so I think that there's a really hard question. It's a really hard question. I think some of the work that we have to do on a day-by-day basis with young men all over that we work with is, how do we give young men more permission to be more of themselves? And how do all of you, how do I respect all of you so that whether you are a more sensitive person or whether you're more athletic and you got a six-pack at 12 years old, like whatever those things are that are part of you, it's okay. Mm-hmm. And I think when we begin to have a society that doesn't let boys, like if you see a 6'4" young man, everyone expects him to be an athlete. And if he doesn't play sports, he doesn't like sports, people are like, what's wrong with you? So it becomes like this thing where society has these sometimes written or maybe not written, but definitely perpetual rules about how our boys have to show up. So I think, you know, it's for a young man who, I think it's hard. I don't even have a good answer. I don't even have a good answer right now.
But certainly it speaks to the way that the impulse to rank and to, you know, that these different ways in which hierarchies are at play, that it's the hierarchies themselves that have to be disentangled, you know, in all directions, with, you know, in terms of working with the boys that you're working with.
Absolutely. And when we do workshops at our school, like if a young man comes into our space, all young men are welcome. And our job as mentors is that if a young man walks in who may not, let's say, be as a masculine young man, maybe he has more feminine qualities, he may feel uncomfortable in a space, but our job is to make him feel safe and make him feel welcome. Like that's our role, is because I believe that all young men need a space to be able to be seen and be held in high regard and be cared about and be building brotherhood with them. And I think that all young men don't get that growing up, so therefore they end up isolating. And so it's tough work, you know. I wish it was a way to be able to say, here's the answer, and it just requires a work. It really requires constant work. But thank you for asking the question. Yeah.
And can I add something to that? Because I think what happens in domination-oriented cultures and subcultures is that children learn early on that there are only two alternatives. You either dominate or you're dominated. So if you carry that mental map, there is no partnership alternative. And when you talk about creating a safe space, what you're really talking about is creating a space in which a partnership kind of mentality can be expressed, that there is this alternative. I mean, we're always talking about the interaction, aren't we, between what we have learned, what we teach early on. This is why, you know, childhood is as important as gender, and the two go together, and the kind of environments that we create.
Mm-hmm. Let's go now to a question that I think was directed to both Brie and Ashanti, about teachers. And the question is really, you know, after you two visit the schools that you visit, there's still work to be done. And I should identify the person. And Tony West is this question comes from. that after you leave, there's still work to be done with faculty and staff so they don't continue to operate in traditional styles of teaching that create harm for some students. What do you suggest for professional development for teachers who can't all participate in off-campus development but need to make changes in order to truly teach students and meet them where they're stuck due to battling their identity of whether it relates to gender, race, language, or others? Do you have some thoughts on directions teachers can go for support for working differently with the young people that they're working with?
Brie, do you want to start there, or should I start? So we do a lot of professional development around that same thing. Is how do we give teachers a space to recognize that their students are more human by first helping them recognize their own humanness. And I think that first, we come at it with our own lens, whether we know it or not. Like I'm a male, I'm a black male. Like I come with all these lenses, and when I watch a situation in my class play out, when I'm dealing with students, there's some things about my lenses that I don't even know that I may be doing, but it's connected to my lens. And when I respond to a situation, I have all those in play. So when we help teachers recognize, hey, do you know that you wear a mask, or can you explore your own mask? We don't tell people they have a mask. We just ask them to look at, do you have a mask, right? And when they're clear that, oh yeah, I show these things to the world, and these things I don't talk about, then we also help them say, well, do you know your students are doing the same thing? So you know that they come to school with their own mask, and there's things that you don't get to see about them. So how are you making room for them to be all of themselves? Now that's a generality. That's not really here's a masculine and feminine situation, but it plays directly related to that, because as a teacher, if you're seeing things play out in your classroom, you notice a little something happen in the corner, you notice somebody being treated a little funny, and you can just be like, oh, I didn't really notice it, because you're maybe watching this outside play, but you're not looking into the situation, and it's tricky. So I think that for me, one of the things that I try and help teachers do is that hopefully you care more about the subjects who you're teaching than you do about the subject that you're teaching. Because I think ultimately we got to make sure there's a human connection there. And so for educators, our job is to give them tools around that. And I think that when we can begin seeing students for more than just a number in a roll book, or a name that we have to give a grade to, then we can help provide our classrooms as safe places for students to be able to be more themselves. And when they know they can come to you and talk to you about tough stuff, then there becomes more a mutual trust there, a trust at least for them to you, and because there's a natural power struggle between teachers and students. And so I think that's some of the things that we try and do when we come to sites, and we offer them to use the tool, the mask campaign, to work with their teachers, to talk about the teachers talking about their own mask around with each other. I think sometimes educators don't know much about each other even, and there's people they work with every day, and I think the students feel that.
One thing I wanted to, when you're talking about tools, first of all, I know that Brie, I hope you'll talk about the kit that you leave behind you.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to tell about the wonderful curriculum, a component that one of our alumni, John Krieger, has developed, the CREED project, which has a strong gendered component. And Ashanti and Brie, it might be useful to you to really find out about that. And we have actually an article by him on our website. But it is really helping young people understand where they learned their values and how they learned their identity and what they really want their identity to be. I think it's a very powerful tool. But Brie, can you talk about that kit? And you are muted. Oh, good.
Yeah. So I just think any social and emotional opportunities that can be made available to teachers, like you're both saying, are going to have an impact that reverberates into the classroom. And watching the mask you live in and watching misrepresentation and any of those opportunities for self-reflection, Love the Skin You're In has an 8-unit follow-up ebook that goes into all of the themes that I touch upon in the 90-minute event in just a much more in-depth way. And they're designed for small groups. They appeal to all different kinds of learners. So there's a visual, they're team driven. I have my social media team. They each created the videos for them. There's a podcast in each of them for the more audio learners. There's a visualization, and then there's group activity, and they're all designed to be done sort of over the course of an hour. And one of the units is specifically on partnership. One of them focuses more on diversity. One of them looks more into the details of hypersexualization. And somebody, I noticed somewhere in the chat box, mentioned Brene Brown's work sort of like feeding into this. And I'm also looking at this question from Linda Wolf about offering these teen talking circles wherein teens have a safe space to tell the truth. You know, that is really what it's all about. And I really think that when you can create an environment that allows for kids to, like you say, feel safe in being vulnerable, they really will open up. I had this incredible experience actually at a high school in Toronto. It was a very diverse audience, probably like 80% young women of color. And at the end of the talk, the principal, bless her heart, gave me a full 2 hours. So we had time at the end of the talk, and I watched as one after another, these young women stood up in front of 500 of their peers. It started with a woman, a Middle Eastern Canadian young woman, who said, you know, I had always felt like I needed to get a nose job, but I realized that, you know, I need to see the beauty in how I am. And then an African American or African Canadian young woman standing up and talking about the, you know, Eurocentric beauty ideals and how she'd been impacted by that, and recognizing that she doesn't have to have big eyes and she doesn't have to have wavy hair in that way. And I watched them, like one of the girls came out of the closet in front of 500 of her peers. And this all comes out of having a conversation where we are opening and we are talking about something that is hurting all of us. And so inherently the space is vulnerable. I mean, I'm an eating disorder survivor. I'm very forthcoming about that, although I don't relay the details of the eating disorder, because obviously you can wind up blueprinting them if you do. And so I create this culture wherein young women start to talk to each other. And then we see like these beautiful things can come out of it. At one high school, you know, the Girls Leadership Committee increased by 600% right after the talk. In another high school, we heard that the entire school culture changed. Suddenly it wasn't cool to fat shame, to slut shame, to body shame. Suddenly the new cool became to lift one another up. And you can do that. And I really believe that vulnerability is like, it's the secret sauce.
Well, I was going to add that safe partnership space.
Yeah.
And I want to add something that I saw Linda speak to, Linda Wolf, about that. Even when the teacher is getting more aware, it's still dangerous and challenging sometimes to be real in front of your peers. And I absolutely agree. I think that what we're trying to say is that we're not trying to create teachers that help to make students expose themselves to everyone. But we are saying if a teacher can be more aware, then maybe it's a one-on-one conversation. Maybe it's, I don't need to have every student tell about everything behind their mask, because I don't think everyone deserves to see behind your mask. I think that you need to be selective of who you give permission to know all of your stuff. But what we want for teachers is to know that if you are judging students based on what you see on the outside, if your judgment of them becomes, well, here's what you are, who you are, then I think that becomes a part where teachers get limited and be able to relate to their students. So I agree, Linda, with that, is that my role is making classrooms more safe, and teachers have to use tools wisely, because you can easily create more trauma if you're not really doing it in a really heartfelt way. And that's what I would think about that. Thank you for that, Linda.
And I want to say I'm so glad you joined us, Linda. Your teen circles are so aligned with all of this. So thank you too for the good work you're doing.
I also would love to acknowledge Linda Staley's post here. A few posts back, she
that's just where I was going to go. Yeah, go ahead.
So the Global Collab Network, Linda Staley is the founding director, and they worked for several years to bring Love the Skin You're In to Arlington, and we were able to do a whole tour there and reach, you know, several of the high schools and middle schools. And then the Collab Network does these sort of small group chat salons to help the teens engage around, you know, the constructive action. They're finding their agency, where they go from here. Are they going to become activists? Are they going to create a group at their school if that doesn't already exist? Are they going to challenge dress codes? I mean, the kids all come up with this stuff. And Linda, if you're on here and want to, can she speak for a minute about that?
Yes, we could give her speaking powers. Let me. And I was noticing she also had, well, let me try doing one thing at a time. I'll probably be more successful. I have to, oh, here we go. Okay. Okay, we're alphabetical by first name. Linda, allowed to talk. Linda, you are unmuted if you're at us on a device and willing to chat with us. Let's hear your voice.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm just so honored to be in this and to hear Brie and all of you speak. I've been working with Brie, and I was just thinking it would be, I'm just so passionate about getting her message and Ashanti and everyone's messages out to these young folks. They're desperate for these messages, and then having safe space for these young people to not only hear the messages, but then, as I think Ashanti's been doing and Brie too, is have small gatherings where they can talk in a safe, neutral, safe space in small groups that are small enough that they can all be heard. So not large, not too large. And I just want to, you know, I think somebody on this said, can we come back, you know, in a couple of weeks and, you know, touch in about how we're doing. And I just think this could be a really powerful group. I don't know how many people are on here, but it seems like if we could work to get speakers like Brie and Ashanti and others to schools and then create safe spaces for kids to talk about these things, I just feel very strongly that that's what's needed so badly. I wish my son could hear Ashanti talk. I'm done.
That's awesome.
I'd like to add that the point about the teachers is very important. And I would like to invite really all of you to encourage, if you are teachers, to take our courses, because what these kids need is not only for themselves to be real, to embrace their humanity, but they need to understand that they can be agents of social change and move the culture from the domination to the partnership direction. And that if we don't do that, it's really like trying to go up on a down escalator. So I invite all of you to really understand the importance of the creation of the culture, not only in an individual school, but in the culture at large. And it's a cumulative effort, isn't it? But I did want to put that in. It is always the environment. And for us humans, that environment is the culture. And whether it's domination or partnership oriented.
I wonder, in our final 10 minutes, I wanted to, there are many other wonderful and important questions in the chat, but I thought it might be a good moment to just go back to each of you and give you an opportunity to kind of offer just a closing from your perspective. What is either, you know, one resource you really would like to point people to, or a particular call to action, something that people on this call or who are listening to this in the future can do to be part of this partnership shift that Riane is describing and that you all are enacting in your work with young people. Are there some final thoughts you want to share around that? Maybe Ashanti, maybe we'll start with you.
Thank you. Thanks for asking that. You know, when Brie and I met for the first time, actually before I met her, I was on her website looking around. I was like, oh, I got to meet her. Like, this is, I'm getting excited. So I'm sorry, my hand. I said, I got to meet her. Like, I think it would be really powerful to connect. And when we finally met, we left there believing that we should be doing workshops and together at different schools all over the world, right? And I think it's something we talked about, and I'm excited about that. So I think if people who are interested in reaching out to us, you can go to either our website, everforwardclub.org, and Brie will tell you her website, and those resources will go out to everyone so that you can reach out to us. But and we also, you know, we know that a lot of schools have no money. We've experienced that, and most schools have no resources. They want to do good work, and unfortunately, planes aren't free. I wish they were, because I would have one. But so we got to get around. So what we say is we offer the tool, the 100,000 Mask Challenge, for educators to do on their own. So we're like, hey, if you want to do this activity, we'll give you the curriculum that goes with it. We'll give you that for schools who say, we want to do this work, but we just have the resources. And so I want it to be a way that no one has to be like, money is why we can't support our students to be more whole and more healthy. And so the 100,000 Mask Challenge will also go out in the resources, but it's 100kmasks.com, 100kmasks.com. And there gives you all the information there where you can order cards or get involved. And so that's the resource we will offer. And, you know, our work is continuing trying to do as much as we can to make an impact, and every day trying to do one thing that helps to change the narrative around providing safe spaces for our students and our young men who I was this young man who was on my way to not good places. And thank goodness that enough teachers got in my way and blocked me and played guard for me. So thank you for asking.
Sure. Brie, how about for you with a closing resource or call?
One thing that I'd like to suggest to families, like a wonderful protective factor for young women in particular, is their relationship with their dad. And so when I do my parent talks, I always suggest that the dads read a book like The Beauty Myth with their daughter. Read it to them at nighttime, let it be part of the bedtime routine, so that she's getting that message from the primary male in her life that she is, worth more than the sum of her parts, and so much more than eye candy. And in terms of, beyond what Ashanti is saying, like, we would love to be able to come to any and all school that would have us. My curriculum functions in the similar way to the 100,000 Masks Challenge. And so schools can also purchase that. The other thing is, just for young women to walk away with, remind them to author their destiny, that when they are writing the stories of their lives, who is the one that's holding the pen? And let that message be loud and clear, because once they come to a place of feeling authorship over their own destiny, then they can come into their agency as leaders to be able to author a partnership world.
Beautiful. Thank you, Brie.
Sure.
And Riane.
Well, I want to make it short because I want you, Sara, to have the closing few minutes. I want to direct myself to Cindy's question. Any thoughts about doing monthly follow-up meetings for us to continue integrating these ideas in our work? And we're back to what both Ashanti and Brie talked about, which is the question of funding. We would love to do this, but it's really, we need, it's very interesting. Regressive, those people who want to push us back towards domination have invested very heavily in new narratives, in reinforcing the old dominator narratives, the language, family values, brilliant, pro-life, brilliant. Whereas progressive foundations have invested much more on this sort of, how many people have you fed? How many people have you educated? On so-called measurable results, and instead of pushing the culture towards partnership. And so the work that Brie and Ashanti and the center are doing is whole systems change work. As I said, when you change these ideas of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, you're changing the idea of what it means to be a human. And so I want to encourage, first of all, Cindy, going to your question, our webinars can provide that continuity for you. Our courses can provide it. And this is where, and so can Brie and Ashanti hopefully offer some courses with us, online. We'd love that. Because really, this is the work of cultural transformation. And it's done one by one, but it's also done by empowering the young people who are so hungry for grounded hope, for a different way, with the understanding that we can build a partnership society and what's needed to do it. So I just want to thank everybody for coming, and I want to particularly thank Brie and Ashanti, and of course, as always, Sara and Anne behind the scenes, for all of that you are doing. This is exciting and wonderful work.
Well, we'll just close with my echoing those sentiments. Thank you, Brie and Ashanti and Riane, for sharing your wisdom. I think it's really so heartening to be reminded that in an age of what we think of as hyperconnectivity, there's really such isolation behind those masks, and that nothing substitutes for actual human-to-human connection and opportunity to speak and to be heard. And the fact that you're doing that and offering that opportunity for young people is such a powerful force for change. And when we can pair that with a broader vision for where we're wanting to go together as fully human beings toward partnership, away from domination, it really becomes a powerful, as Riane says, grounded, practical kind of vision for what is possible for us. And so thank you for the work you're doing to make that possibility more real in the lives of all of those that you touch. And thank all of you for being with us today. Those of you here present live right now, those of you who are watching this in replay, thanks for tuning in. And we look forward to inviting you back for future conversations. There's one coming up, by the way, on October 3rd, a Wednesday. CPS is hosting a webinar on women's leadership, which will be really exciting with, again, some really powerful and
Jamia Wilson and Carla Goldstein. I think many of you know both Jamia and Carla, and I'll be there too.
Yes. So do join us a week from Wednesday, and watch your emails for a follow-up email from Anne, which will include the link to this recording, lots of other resources, and also importantly, how you can reach out and invite Brie and Ashanti to come to your school or your community, how you can support the work of the Center for Partnership Studies, etc. Thank you for your kind notes in the chat as we part ways, and be well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Ashanti.
Bye.
Bye, Brie.
Bye-bye. Bless you all, and thank you all.
Thank you, Riane.
You.